the vast majority of those who will join us. So I want to welcome everyone, whether you're new to this organization tonight or whether you were on our last call with this panel. Tonight is both the conclusion and the climax of our three-part series on American political polarization. By our, I mean the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington, which has been meeting since the beginning of 2009, bringing together Jews, Muslims, and allies throughout the greater Washington area. Now, some of you are surely tuning in out of curiosity for what many people in this city consider a bizarre lab animal known as the Trump voter. But remember, this program is being presented not primarily to scratch an itch, to understand those whose behavior is supposed to be beyond understanding, but rather because we find ourselves living in a broken country in which each side thinks the other has lost its collective mind. And we at JIDS believes that this nation had better heal itself and fast. In other words, we need to build bridges, journey across the water, and figure out how we can actually relate to one another in a way that can't be described as patronizing, condescending, or arrogant. And if there is a characteristic virtue of living in the United States today, arrogance might be it. And I'm being sarcastic to use that word. But frankly, those of us who've organized the last session were really impressed with how civil and respectful everyone was. So I want to first of all, thank you if you participated in the last session for being that way, and ask you to keep it up tonight. And it will be more of a challenge because this entire program will be devoted to politics. And you are bound to hear things, regardless of your political views, that will sound like chalk on a blackboard. Well, I can start by quoting the great Rabbi Hillel in saying, "What is hateful to you, do not do unto your neighbor." But I also want to quote another leader, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who said, "You're entitled to your own opinions. You're not just entitled to your own facts." If you think somebody has misstated a fact, then when it's your turn to be recognized, state the correct one. But when it comes to people's opinions, their values, their ultimate conclusions, please listen with an open mind and an open heart, just as you would want your political opponents to listen when you talk. Prior to tonight's session, we've asked for questions from the JIDS community to provide to the panelists in advance. And we got so many questions that the panelists could not even begin to answer them all, or else we'd be here all night and all day tomorrow. They will do their best to make a coherent statement about their views. That is first and foremost in importance. And if they're also able to be responsive to some of your questions, so much the better. I will hold the panelists to rigid time limits in their statements, in their initial statements, and I'll give them a 2-minute warning before, it's over. And when they're done, when the 4 of them are done, you can virtually raise your hands and either make short statements of your own, meaning up to a minute, or ask questions of the panel. As we always do with JIDS, we are going to try to get in as many voices tonight as possible. If this session goes well and you want us to revisit the topic of political polarization in the future, send me an email and let us know. I sent my email at the beginning in the chat, and let us know that our work in this area is not finished. We would be happy to return to this topic if the community thinks it's worthwhile. So that's all I have to say. I want to begin by introducing the first panelist who went last when we did this the previous time. Steve Tannenbaum is someone I've known maybe 51, 2 years, something like that. He's the operator of a local construction and development company. He's a high-ranked black belt who has trained soldiers and officials both in Israel and the United States in, what do you call it, hand-to-hand combat. And he's a member of the Greater Washington Jewish Sports Hall of Fame, which is actually not a joke to you anti-Semites out there. It's a real thing. There may be a great Italian War Heroes Hall of Fame, I don't know, but there's certainly a Greater Washington Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. And Steve is in it for, among other things, his wrestling prowess. He was a champion wrestler when we went to high school together. So Steve, please unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you, distinguished guests. I think first off, we have to set some axioms. The first one is this country is divided, and too much media, too many people tend to make it look like the right side is a small percentage of this country, when in reality, we're pretty split down the center. This country has been divided under Obama. It got worse under Trump. We're in a horrible divided state, but we cannot forget that roughly 50% of the people have different views and political affiliations than we do. So it's not 90 to 10, it's almost 50-50. And we have to keep that in mind. The second thing is, it's up to us as educated people, as people who are committed to being involved, to change the process and to change the way we debate, the way we talk, the way we listen, and the way we present ourselves. It's become too easy to label, I support Trump, so I'm a racist. No, I'm not a racist. You support Biden, you must be communist. No, you're not. And these labels and these name calling has to stop. And we have to do things we all can agree on together. With all the polarization, there's nobody here who's going to change your mind. We have some 55 participants, which is fantastic. But no matter what I say, no matter what any of the panelists say, no matter what any of the participants say, no one will leave here and change their mind. These things we have to accept. However, we can walk away with a resolve that we're not going to name call, that not everyone who supported Trump is a racist, and not everyone who supported Biden is a communist or whatever label that we might want to retaliate with. So I want everyone to keep that in mind. One, let's have try not to have name calling, and let's everyone agree as a group, we want to change this way politics has been, and it's pretty bad. Now to get to the controversial subjects, we were given certain questions to answer, to relate to. I'll touch briefly on some of them. However, none of them included Afghanistan and what's going on right now. So I would like to address that first. I think we are in a horrible, horrible situation. Joe Biden did not listen to the advice of the generals that said we need to keep at least 3,000 to 5,000 people in till we're all out. And Biden chose to ignore them and remove the people, created chaos, created a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum. The Taliban, of course, took over, even if it was quicker than most people thought. At the same time, we cannot look at the other mindset as our mindset. I was in the Middle East and Africa for some 15, 16 years, and it took me a long while to be able to see why and how they view things from their point of view versus mine as an American that grew up with a good education and unlimited opportunity. Where we failed, and I see this as a problem with the Democrat Party, and where we failed was, one, we did not listen to the generals. We did not have a good exit strategy. And even though the exit strategy was keep 3,000 in to get us all out, was not even adhered to. The second, Afghanistan is not really a country. We have a certain sense of nationalism as Americans. The African people have no such thing. Of course, it was once British. It was divided up. You have such mountainous regions. It's very tribal. We as Americans do not understand the tribal mentality because it's beneath us. It's lower than us. It does not exist in our world.
So Steve, I don't want to cut you off, but please, you've talked a bit about Afghanistan. Please talk about why you voted for Trump, because
okay,
so it wasn't because of this.
So okay, Dan. So why I voted for Trump is mainly I voted against Hillary Clinton. And it's hard for me and a lot of people to remember who you voted for. And it's turned into who you voted against. I have voted Democrat. I voted for Bill Clinton. I've supported many Democrat candidates. I'm not a one-party voter. And I more or less voted against Hillary Clinton because of certain type reasons. And one of the things is, and I like the Republican Party for the values they stand for. I believe in pro-life. I believe that the Democrat Party is pushing an agenda of child abuse. And I know this will touch a bunch of people hard. I think it's child abuse. For us to even have a discussion of which bathroom to use, of whether we're going to let kids in, that was one of the first things Trump did, was get transes, get people who are mentally ill out of the elementary school bathrooms. And so there was no problem figuring out whether you're a man or a girl. And all of a sudden, the Democrats, they got sued in New York. They had to put 60 genders available on the license plate, on your license that you can choose from. It's gotten too much ridiculous. So I knew the Republicans, I knew Trump was against these things. In terms of abortion, I think it was horrible to see the Democrats cheer at being able to abort a 9-month-old kid, that you can legally let him scream and die and not give him any hand. I think it was horrible. I think even as a successful bill that got passed, I can't believe people were clapping. It's sad time, which, was another thing about Trump that I like. Two, I liked he wasn't a career politician. When I saw Nancy Pelosi behind Trump at the State of the Union address, I had flashbacks of her behind Ronald Reagan, complaining, nothing's changed. We need fresh people We need people who can't be bought, who've made millions and millions of dollars, who built the system. I could not find. The other thing, I really believe as a Jew that Trump would move the embassy. Obama promised and he failed. Obama could have been the mandala of the United States. And instead he turned into a race baiter. He created the most ever on food stamps. He created the worst unemployment that we've seen in 50 years. He got us into 5 new wars. We had some of the worst economic turns. No one I know knows why he got a Nobel Peace Prize. I ask people, I still don't know why. Most of my Democratic friends can't tell you why. And so after what I thought was a disastrous presidency that hurt my family, was way worse off, I had no choice but to give Trump a chance. Then when it came time for re-election, why did I vote for him again? Well, Biden has a history of racism. If you remember, he actually cast the deciding vote not to bus kids. He swore his children would never go to school with black kids. He had actual serious racist history, horrible, disturbing pictures of pedophile Tara Reid accusing him and being shot down, plus 3 brain aneurysms. Let the man retire. He served his country well, and he's a horrible president. And the accomplishments of Trump were phenomenal.
2-minute warning, Steve, 2-minute warning.
Okay, 2-minute warning. Just a couple things that I want to say in terms of just to give a couple little facts on there. We have one of the most incredible foreign policy achievements ever. Israel's flying with Saudi Arabia side by side to bomb Syria and Iranian interests, side by side. The Abraham Accords were phenomenal, what he did. It takes real cahoots to walk alone into North Korea to try and make peace. He made peace with the Taliban. The Taliban almost surrendered under Trump. He was making deals with them, trying to do things. And I could never imagine this fiasco happening under our president. I could never, ever imagine it happening. The job market, and my family and all of your families were better off under Trump, except I have to leave with one thing. I think he's a bully. I don't want to see him president again. I loved his policies. I think we need someone that will put his policies in place that's not a bully, but who's not afraid to stand up to China, to stand up to these things. Under Trump, we lowered our carbon footprint more than any nation in the world. So why does Biden let China build 5 new coal plants and India pollute? And he's so the Democrats will tax us on what we drive, they'll tax us on the climate change, and they'll let Russia build the oil lines. They'll let China build the brand new coal plants and won't say anything. And they'll tax hardworking Americans. One last thing, we were almost 0 net oil imports. First thing unbelievable in our life. I'd rather have $1.90, $1.78 a gallon gas in the mean tweet than Biden running around costing my kids, costing you, costing our families much, much more money, much, much more heartache, and much, much more in danger because of the reckless Democratic liberal policies. And I'm sorry, one more thing too. Before
last word.
My last word. Before the fall of any great society, Rome, Greece, Egypt, one thing in common was the rise of homosexuality, of sexual debauchery, of all this liberal type agenda that we see going on now. Every one of them had that thing in common. And it scares me for my kids and the generations ahead of us of the Democrat policies and what they stand for today.
All right, thank you, Steve. So I would like to make a request. It's one thing for people to send chats, you know, one or two chats maybe, but there's so many chats with comments back and forth. I'm just wondering if anybody can actually be listening to the speakers. I mean, most of these chats are actually well enough written from a grammatical standpoint that I figure y'all aren't listening. The point of this is to listen. I'm glad we all have opinions, but that's the point of the second part of the program. So can we please, enough with the chat and with the comments, please listen to these people. They are courageous to come out here and say things to this community that they have to know will not be broadly loved by the entire community. Let's show them the respect to listen to what they have to say, please. The next speaker, Anna Lipkin, is a trustee on JIDS. And she wears many, many hats. She's a computer scientist. She's an accomplished dancer. She's a world traveler. And I think you all heard a very, very moving story about her journey growing up in the Soviet Union and coming here. Anna, the floor is yours. And again, we will enforce these time limits. And I asked, as I did with Steve, if people want to talk about Afghanistan all night, bless them. But during these prepared statements, let's talk about why you voted for Trump, please. Thank you.
All right, can you guys, first of all, can you hear and see me? Because I cannot hear or see myself. Okay, wonderful. Fellow JIDS members and dear guests, before I start boring you with my presentation, I want to throw a little joke. And I promise it's not going to be as long as the one about the Russian immigrant. I was in New Hampshire a month ago. And as you might know, there are more bears in New Hampshire than people. And so my joke is inspired by that. A human runs away from the bear. In desperation, he turns around and goes, "Listen, bear, I'm a vegetarian." "Very well, human. I guess that makes me a humanitarian." Keep the joke in mind and let's begin. Thank you for your time and for your interest in getting to understand the other side. My special thanks goes to the mastermind behind this series, Dan Spiro. It was his idea to devote some of our interfaith activity to understand the political other. And in my appreciation, I'd like to open my presentation by quoting Dan's favorite teacher, Baruch Spinoza. I bet Dan's idea for this series has something to do with Spinoza's teaching, because Spinoza said, "The highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free." Right, Dan? And my hope is that just like Dan, you've gathered around your screens tonight to try to learn and understand that which you don't understand yet. And it's an enormously difficult task to understand the other, because we all tend to believe that we are not fools. We all view ourselves as educated, rational, thinking human beings. And even though we make stupid mistakes every now and then, it doesn't automatically imply that we're inherently stupid, or careless, or airheads. But then what's the definition of a wise, rational, thinking man? What's the baseline? Is there an absolute measure? Back in school, that very school where I was ashamed to make my appearance noticed, we would often ask our physics teacher, why do we measure electric current in amperes? And why do we measure voltage in volts, weight in kilograms, and distance in meters? Of course, it was an international system back then. And his answer was always the same, because people came together and agreed upon these units of measurements. But when it comes to measuring wisdom, what's the unit of measurement? Who is wise? Why would anyone listen to me and not them? Or vice versa? Why would I want to listen to them and not myself? Well, here's the definition that I live by. Incidentally, it comes from the man who was proclaimed the wisest man of all times, and definitely of his time, King Solomon. The definition says, beginning of wisdom is fear of God, and knowing the Holy One is understanding. Let me repeat that, it's important. Beginning of wisdom is fear of God, and knowing the Holy One is understanding. I'm sure my definition, my unit of measurement is not the one that everybody has agreed upon. And I don't claim it to be the ultimate measurement of wisdom. But if you were to try to understand me and my reasoning, I thought you might want to know what are my roots and what's the bottom line of my thinking. Because when I come across an important decision, Bible is always my ultimate guidance. Would God approve of my actions if I were to do this? And now that we've established the baseline, I'd like to guide you on a little experiment. Please play along, because this experiment is so important that I decided to devote a couple of minutes of my presentation time to this experiment. And besides, it warms my heart as a scientist. So please, close your eyes, relax your body, and focus on emptying your mind. This is the most typical beginning of every meditation. I will give you exactly 1 minute, during which I invite you to focus on emptying your mind. And if you notice that your mind wanders, or thinks different thoughts, or that your eyes open and your fingers reach for that phone, just notice how long can your mind survive without thinking a thing, and go. Don't cheat, I can see you. And stop, open your eyes. By show of hands, was there anyone who was able to maintain the complete emptiness of mind for the entire minute? Even though this seems like an easy task, truth is, it takes years of meditations and practice to learn to completely empty your mind. Your mind thrives by thinking. It cannot remain empty for prolonged periods of time. Just like your brain needs oxygen and your blood needs water, your mind needs to be engaged by thinking. In the same way, your soul, which is a part of the divine, cannot survive without doing good things, acts of kindness, acts of justice, because the entire purpose of creation was for a man to do good things, to do right things, to do just things. And like it or not, your mental and spiritual well-being depends on your capability to realize your purpose. We all want to do good, which brings us back to my first question. Just what is good, or morally right, or a just thing to do? What's the ultimate measurement of these lofty goals? Who defines them? Well, apparently, if you take God out of the equation, then your soul will try to attach itself to self-made or man-made definitions of goodness, righteousness, and justice. And that's where the confusion begins. It seems like we just can't agree on what's ultimately good and what's ultimately bad. And the number of these topics where our views differ keeps widening and growing. Is it good to get the vaccine, or is it detrimental to health? Is the climate really changing today more than it's ever changed before? Or is it just a normal course of things in the grand scheme? What's ultimately more important, freedom or equality? Well, why is that? If something is scientifically proven to be good for you, say sleeping 8 hours each night, then there should be no controversy around it, right? Well, Let's do another little experiment. It's called show fingers. How many fingers do you see? And since we're not in the same room and you cannot turn around me, I'll turn myself. How many fingers do you see now? And now, can you see that what's clear to you as day can be clear to someone else also as day? And yet you both will have absolutely different perception of what you see. Our reality is such that we all have different vantage points. I grew up in Soviet Russia, and you might have grown up in another totalitarian country or in a completely free country. But wherever you grew up, nobody has the same set of parents, siblings, friends, schools, circumstances, not even identical twins. And therefore, everybody's vantage point is different from another one's. Where I see one finger, you might see four or all five. So what's the solution here? How do we reconcile? Shall we agree that there are three fingers? No way, you will say. There are five fingers. The science says so, right? Yes, my dear JITS members and guests, we could count fingers on one hand, but the definitions of good and bad, right and wrong, fair, not fair, are far more complicated than counting fingers. And most often they have to do with one's moral values. And there is no science behind moral values, at least not yet. So let me give you a few examples of what I see from my vantage point. I see that when the end goal justifies the means, it leads to scary isms such as Nazism or communism. I also see that it leads to intolerance and injustice. If you are not like me, you must be evil. I also see that it will inevitably lead to the destruction of both freedom and equality. I began by quoting the Bible, and I'd like to conclude with the Bible. Do you know what's one commandment that God keeps repeating time and time again? I'm not an expert in theology, but I believe it's one commandment that God repeats more than any other. Like everything genius, it's very simple. It says, love the stranger. And he explains, because you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. Of course, you can define that stranger as the one who is trying to cross Mexican border. And it's easy to love that stranger because he is far and harmless to you. But then there is another type of stranger, the stranger who lives in your own community and participates in everything you participate. He also works, he also pays taxes, and he also votes, just like you, except he thinks completely differently, and his values are vastly different from yours. Now, can you love that stranger? My fellow JITS members and guests.
Anna, so you actually
Yes.
do have 2 minutes to go. And I think that some percentage of the people here would appreciate a more pedestrian supplement to explain why exactly you voted for Trump. Because that statement could have been delivered by a Biden voter or a Trump voter. So if you can
Absolutely.
take a couple of minutes and do that, I think people would appreciate that.
Absolutely. And so my values basically jive with the values that drive Trump. Family values, nation importance, the importance of Israel. My values, whatever his policies were, they just jive with what he was. Yes, he might have been not the best spoken president, or his tweets were not the most cohesive. Yet his values and my values coincide, and so I was happy with what he proposed and where he drove the country.
So you gave
It's
a
just
specific.
simple. I wanted to step.
You gave a specific in terms of Israel. Are there other? Can you be more specific? I mean, I think we know what you meant by Israel. Can you give other specific examples? Steve gave examples. I'm sure he'll take some guff for that. But I think it's actually helpful for people to give the specific examples because that's what people want to learn.
So whatever your questions are, and whenever you ask, how could you, one of the questions was, how could you bring yourself to vote for Trump? Well, I've done a lot of massages and I've got some social work therapy and reading books and meditating and listening to music. And I brought myself to vote for Trump because I think that his policies are right. Whatever the questions were, how could you bring yourself to vote for him? Because I believe that he is driving the country in the right direction, bottom line. And our country and the global community.
And you mentioned the policies about Israel. Are there other specific policies you'd like to cite before we move on to the next panelist? Specific policies or specific domains?
I mean, everything that Steve has mentioned, everything that's a point of controversy, I support him. Besides his tweets, of course. I don't get into the nitty-gritty. But in the grand scheme of things, I support all his policies and decisions. So whatever you poke, you can poke into different directions. I support him.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let us move on. And again, there will be time for questions and answers or just comments and responses after all four panelists have spoken. The next panelist is Manga Ananthamula. I think you're muted. Manga is the president of a program management company. She was the 2020 Republican candidate for the United States Congress for Virginia's 11th district. And somehow she got over 100,000 votes in Northern Virginia. Now, having just driven through Southern Virginia, I think I could get 100,000 votes. I mean, I'm sure you could have gotten 1 trillion votes there, but getting over 100,000 votes as a Republican in Northern Virginia is quite a feat. Congratulations on that. And the floor is yours, Manga.
Thank you, Dan, for arranging this panel discussions. I think this is the most needed discussion lately for what we are seeing. The temperatures of the political temperatures outside are so difficult for people to accept the way the others are thinking. Why I voted for Trump has always been the question people asked me. And there are a few reasons why I voted for him. I have always been an independent voter, voted Republican, voted Democrat. I've always went by the candidate's worthiness more than anything else. But one of the rallies that I got to attend by accident when I was living in North Carolina, somehow I have seen this man in the hour-and-a-half rally that he connected with people. He was directly talking to people, and people were connecting to what he was saying. That's when I decided there was something about this man. Until such time, I have never considered him as a candidate that might even be nominated for Republican Party. And more I watched him, more I talked to people in the southern part of United States, I started realizing that people started seeing him as new hope. People started seeing him as someone who they trust, who they are having a lot of faith in.
Manga,
It cannot be happening.
Manga, I'm interrupting you through no fault of your own. Can we please stop the chatting, folks? Can we please listen? Thank you. Go ahead.
So the moment I heard more from people why they think he is their hope, that's where I started thinking differently than other people. At the end of the day, when you elect a president, you're not electing a man to fill the chair, to warm the chair in that Oval Office. You want a man there who will actually fulfill the needs of people and who can be that person who is actually giving them who gave them the hope, is also making that dream come true for them. And I knew, more I heard, I knew he was that man. And when I saw his children conduct themselves in public and compared to other leaders and their children in the past who has been in that office, I knew there was something different about this man. A successful man is one who knows how to raise his family first, who can be a successful father, who can be a role model for his children, and whose children can actually respect their father, is a successful man, in my opinion. And that's my only personal opinion. And that's how I see whether a man is trustworthy or not. If he can command respect from his adult children, that means that man has something good, has something credible. And then I looked at his businesses. He always flourished. He started with $1 million and now he's a multi-billionaire. He did not become that man for nothing. He must have worked hard. And all his children are successful entrepreneurs. Of course, he helped them too. And then the second reason for me is he is absolutely not a politician. It's not that I liked everything that I heard from him. It's not that I liked the way he put things forward. But then when I went into that nitty-gritty detail, then it'll only make me look at him as a person, as an individual, and not selecting a president who can do a larger good for the community. What is a larger good? People should have, the country must have a flourishing economy. People must have good jobs. There should not be unemployment. And we have to have our national security, a good national security. Our borders must be closed. And how he has his immigration policies, because after all, this country is a land of immigrants. If a president cannot have a good immigration policy, then for me, he is not a president for a dream nation that the world looks for. And the way he explained he was going to build new jobs, I think he did it. The way he built economy, he did it. We have to give choice and we have to give someone an opportunity to prove themselves. We cannot always be stuck with career politicians. And to me, for the first time, as the panelist Steve has mentioned, between Hillary and Trump, he was a fresh breath of air for me. He was not a politician. I could see myself in him like a common man, that I just somehow did not appreciate the things the way he said, but then I have to always brush them aside to see what is good for this country. And when he had his plans and he went and met with the military folks, I could see the respect he held for the uniformed officers, for the soldiers, how much he appreciated their services. I think that to me is also important, coming from a military family. And I know what it is to send your son or a daughter into military and into war. I had a son in US Navy that was always gone, but I knew this country would take care of my son as a soldier. And that's what every parent that has a military daughter or a son or a husband should feel, that their family is protected. Their men and women in uniform are safe. And Hillary failed in Benghazi. There she had absolutely lost my vote. How could you send your own people to another country and have them, leave them there to die? That's a no-brainer for me. I did not want to vote for Hillary. And there were also many other reasons that I did not vote for Hillary. I'm not going to discuss them over here, but definitely Trump was my choice. He convinced me that he's the man that can deliver. And a lot of people ask me he's xenophobic and all of that. I don't think he was xenophobic. I think I was treated more fair during Trump era in my workplace than any other time. Did I feel safe during Trump presidency or administration was one of the questions that was asked of us. I definitely felt safe that Trump was our president, and he never made any statement that made me as a Hindu feel that I'm targeted. Whereas if you have looked at everything that was happening in Democrat-led cities, you know that Hindus were a target. You know that India was a target. We have been called, Hindus were called as extremists and radicals, which is absolutely not so true. And that was concocted and hateful statements. And so many Hindus were attacked in Democrat-led cities. But the only hope we had was Trump in the office. That will make a difference. And in fact, it was Democrats, I think, who, if I have to share my personal experience and anecdote, I was forced to move out of my home from Herndon only because I'm a Republican. Should I be expecting that from my Democrat neighbors, who were my neighbors of 20 years? All because I am a Republican, they would vandalize my home. They would throw trash in my yard. So I was forced to move out instead of having to pick a fight with them.
2-minute warning. 2-minute warning.
And his education policies were also something that I always appreciated. He wanted to give the leverage of parents choosing the school and curriculum for their children that fits them. Why can't parents choose to send their children to charter schools or private schools? And he gave parents that control. Had President Trump been the president again, probably we would have not been seeing this transgender nonsense happening in schools. Why all the opportunities of women and girls are taken away in the sports area and being given to a transgender male? That's not fair. And this is a war against women. I think Biden is letting this happen. We would have been better off with Trump in the Oval Office.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you all for not, continuing the chat after I made that request. We will have plenty of opportunities for everybody's voice to be heard, as we always do. Okay, so we have one final panelist, and I'm going to ask her to turn on her video now. That is Saba Ahmed, who is our one Muslim panelist. She is a Pakistani-American patent lawyer. She is also the founder of the Republican Muslim Coalition, which she founded in order to bring the voice of conservative Muslims to American politics. And Saba, I see that you are muted and your video is off. There you go. Now you're no longer muted. There you go. Okay, so the floor is yours.
All right. Hello. Salam, shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace, greetings to all of you. Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here. As a conservative Muslim, I am happy to share my thoughts on what led to my decision in supporting Trump. I believe in 2016, when I first voted for him, I was very excited by his campaign. There were several things that we disagreed about, but at the same time, I really liked his non-career politician stance on things. I liked his policies. He was strong on national security, defense, pro-life, traditional family values, pro-business, pro-jobs creation, and all of that. So I really like that. As a Republican, those are the values that we espouse for, and I saw those being represented by the Trump administration. In 2020, I did support him again. Unfortunately, we lost the election, but we did do our best. I've gotten a lot of backlash from within the Muslim community as well as outside about supporting Trump, but I think prior to 9/11, about 70% of Muslim Americans voted for Republicans because of our conservative Islamic values. So it's hard for me to understand why we left our stance. I understand there was a lot of backlash after 9/11. I understand the policies that targeted Muslims, led Muslims towards Democrats, but on a political values spectrum, our conservative values all align with the Republican Party, and being pro-life, traditional family values, all conservative Islamic values all align with that. So supporting Trump was our only option in 2016 and 2020. I felt, he was the main Republican presidential nominee. We had to stand behind him. He wasn't perfect. Like I said, he was not a career politician. He often said things that he probably shouldn't have on Twitter and just generally. But at the same time, he was strong. He did his best, and he connected with American people. And I felt that, when I listened to him, he spoke to me because I felt he was strong on the policies that I cared about. I didn't see any other option, actually, with Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. That was just not an option because I was strongly opposed to a lot of the Democratic liberal policies. I felt like they were destroying our country, destroying America, our foundational values. So it took me, it wasn't easy being Republican Muslim, but I felt that was important. And I tried to raise my voice on a lot of major broadcast networks, as well as we had a lot of support. We had a Muslims for Trump group that was fairly active in New York, New Jersey, and DC, Virginia area. But we have a lot of work to do within our Muslim community in terms of our outreach to Republicans, and then vice versa, the GOP outreach to the Muslim American communities, especially in the key electoral states, because I think that's what led the minority votes in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas. A lot of our communities are largely populated in these states, and that's kind of what led to the swing towards Biden in 2020. So, and other than that, I did try to answer some of those questions. I apologize in the beginning. I just copied some of my responses in the chat just so that I put it out there, because I know there were several questions circulating in the last few weeks. People wanted to know why, as a Muslim American, I would consider supporting Trump. There was quite a few not so nice comments as well. So, but I wanted to just put out my thoughts out there. We're human beings. We're also Americans. We are also, struggling, working hard, trying to make a good life for ourselves. But there are no hand-me-downs here. There's, we all have to work hard. And I've been here. I came here when I was very young from Pakistan, and my parents immigrated to this country. I grew up here. I went to school, university, law school, and became a patent attorney. I've been working hard trying to make a living for myself and for my family. And I believe I don't want the government taxing me more. I don't want government subsidies or handouts or anything. I'm trying to do my best as an individual, my freedoms, my liberty. I love my freedoms in America. Being a Muslim woman, I'm watching what's happening in Afghanistan. I watch a lot of Muslim women now closing the, not being able to talk, not being able to exercise our freedoms. And I love being in America as a Muslim woman because I can do whatever I want and not have anybody impose their version of Sharia law on me or any other form of government. I love that, as an American woman, I'm able to work and raise my kids and just be active in this society. I used to do a lot more media outreach work before, up until 2016 election, but I've kind of shied away from that for the last few years just because I had kids and just got busy. But I was really excited about joining this panel because I think that voice needs to be heard, that we're normal people supporting President Trump. It's not like we're just outliers, and we're not like, and there's a lot of us. It's not just me. I know that thousands of Muslims who voted for President Trump, and I'm sure, Democrats talk all nice to Muslims. They love our votes. They love our money. They love fundraising in our Muslim. I know several Muslim American doctor groups who regularly host fundraisers, and they raised millions of dollars for Biden last year. And I just didn't even see this smallest parallel to that in the Trump side. And I wish that, we were strategic about our outreach to both political parties as the Muslim American community. Just, one-sided Democratic politics, it will only lead us so far. I think there's a lot more work to be done. Republicans, what I like about them are very cutthroat, kind of like if they don't want to do something, they'll just tell it to your face. Democrats will just sugarcoat it. They won't do it either, but they'll sugarcoat it and make you feel like, they'll do everything for you. So I just didn't like those, two-faced politics from some of the Democrats I got to know. So there's a lot more work to be done. And, Trump wasn't perfect, but he was our Republican nominee, and I stood behind him. And I hope to get more involved in the future in presidential elections, and especially helping GOP reach out to Muslim Americans and minorities in all faith communities, I believe, especially in key electoral states. I think there's a huge void in terms of GOP outreach towards these swing voters. And I hope that we will be able to step up our efforts going forward. And
so Saba, you have a couple of more minutes that you can take. I can say that, Anna made a reference to my love for philosophy. As a native Washingtonian, I can report that this is a city that generally hates philosophy. It can't cope with it. It's alien to the spirit of Washington. We want to hear about policies. Personally, I prefer philosophy, but I know my city. So would you care to give a couple of policies that you love about the Republican Party and a couple of policies that really turns you off about the Democratic Party, even if you put it in the chat? Because remember,
I think economy,
yeah.
I love the, how the economy grew, pro-jobs policies, pro-business policies, pro-trade, international influence around the world, are restoring American respect around the world, and national security, defense. I felt that Trump had much more stronger policies in all of these areas as compared to Biden or Obama. Or and being from Pakistan, I was actually appalled at under the Obama administration, the drone strikes increased so much. And we did that in Afghanistan and Pakistan for years, and it accomplished absolutely nothing. Under Trump, he ended those drone strikes on day one, and I believe he worked with the Pakistani government to end any sort of terrorism and stuff. So I don't think us going unilaterally in Afghanistan or Pakistan or any other nation building state of mind, there is no clear end goal. And I believe we ought to be smarter about engaging in conflicts that are never ending, and not waste our blood and dollars in it. I hope that, going forward, I can help regardless of the administration. I want to work for American as an American ambassador to the Muslim world. Like, I just can't, because there's no Muslim woman that I see from the conservative side or even Democratic side. I think there's so much work to be done in terms of inclusive face of America that we need to present to the world. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I hope that, by engaging with each other, having these dialogues and building that patience level and diplomatic and cred to be able to talk to one another, we can move forward and do some good for this world.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
And I think we will now largely turn this over to the rest of you. I will say that I noticed that there was something that Steve put in the chat. I think it was a list of Trump's accomplishments. So I obviously did not read it because I'm telling people not to look at the chat, but you may want to look at that and feel free to ask questions of any of the panelists about that. I see there's been a number of questions that have been put in the chat, and a number of people have raised their hands. I'm just going to mention a list of people whose names I saw, and we'll go in this order for the beginning. Stuart Levin, Steve Sawmill, Fatima Argun, Daniela Bloom, Gary Sampliner, Kate Bennett, Mike Gauss, Arnie Orhan, and Andrea Barron. I'm sure I've missed some of you, but then you can raise your hand, or you can send a chat to me and I'll call on you. So Stuart Levin, if you are still on, if you'd like to ask your question or make your comment.
My question is, what do the panelists think should be done about undocumented individuals who are already in the US? And I'm not talking about DACA situations, non-DACA situations.
I can take that question. I've always suggested there are undocumented immigrants in this country, and there are more than 1 million or few millions of people. And they have been the contributing people in this country, and they are very hardworking. And their children grew up here. They know no other country other than this country. You cannot throw them out. You cannot be ruthless, not allowing them to live in this country. I would suggest, and I always suggested, we have to find ways to keep them. Make them legally immigrant people in this country, give them work permits. And the first generation that violated the rule and brought their children here illegally with them, let that first generation also get legal immigration status to live in this country, but they may not get the citizenship or the voting rights because of breaking the law. Since if they do not have any criminal records, they should be allowed to stay here, not be deported, and let them wait in the immigration line in the queue to get their green cards, and their children should eventually become citizens too. So let them also become legal immigrants, and we should give them a chance as long as they do not have any criminal records.
Okay. I also saw questions from Jim Ehrman and Rational Marylander. I'm going to ask you to identify yourself, but we're going to continue to go on that list downward to Steve Sawmill. Steve?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I hear all of you about your reasons for backing Trump, but I'm puzzled how you could vote to re-elect him when by that time it was known that he publicly sided with Putin regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election. And he stated that support the news sponsors siding against his own administration's entire intelligence and security apparatus. And if you continue to support him now, how can you do that after he undermined American democracy, risking the lives of his vice president and sitting members of Congress by provoking the January 6th attack on the Capitol? Connected to that, a very key question. Do you believe Biden was fairly elected?
Let me answer that. I'm Russian. I can deal with Putin and Trump with everybody at once. And I have not prepared for this answer. So it's just my train of thoughts. So if you look at the world from a global, from bird's eye view, try to lift yourself up into the outer space and look at the world. And if you see these evil empires and evil forces trying to dominate the world. So here is Putin, here is Iran, here is North Korea, here is China. I probably mentioned them all. Here's Afghanistan now, new kid on the block. Of all these people, who would you want to be friends with? Remember how Churchill made alliance with Stalin during the World War II? Because he decided that this is the lesser of all evils. So yeah, maybe Putin is not your best friend, but of all the people that I've mentioned here, who do you want to be friends with? Do you want to be enemies with Russia, or you want to be friends with Russia? So yeah, maybe Putin is not your best ally. But he's not your worst ally either. It's so much better for America, for everybody in the world, for the entire global stability, is when America and Russia is on the same side of the equation. Whatever Putin is doing in his country is not any worse than whatever Ahmadinejad or whoever is in Iran now is doing in his country, or whatever happens in China, or whatever happens in North Korea. Yes, they're all evil empires. They don't treat their people right. None of them. So who do you want to be friends with? That's one. Second, what was the second question?
It has to deal with the election. And again,
that has to do with the election.
You guys were not asked to deal with this because this came after the vote, just like Afghanistan. But if you wanted to talk about whether you thought Biden really won the election or how you reacted to the way Trump handled the post-election.
Winning the election, yes.
Right.
Yes, let me give you my own personal, private, 100% biased example. I used to live in New York City, and I moved to India in 2004, and I moved to Washington in 2009, I'm sorry. I took the office 2 weeks before Obama. I won. So in 2020, my parents received an absentee ballot from me in New York. I mailed the voting committee in New York, the voting committee in Maryland. I mailed the White House, the Republican committee in both the states. And I said that my parents are receiving absentee ballots and they can vote. They just basically can commit voters fraud. Is there any way to prevent it from happening? The only response I got was from state of New York saying that, are you planning to commit voters fraud? Really? If I'm reporting this, am I planning to commit voters fraud? I found out through this. As I mentioned this to my friends, I found out that my parents' neighbor, who lives across the hallway from them, she got absentee voter ballot for her husband of 5 years late. Another friend got an absentee ballot for her son who moved to California 15 years ago. So is there any way to make sure that all these votes who were submitted by mail actually were not fraudulent? Here's again my absolutely biased private example. I don't know about the rest. I heard all kinds of stories about votes being thrown in the garbage and all that. I'm not a witness of that. I can only speak about what I've seen with my own very eyes. So here's your voter fraud. Now, there was something about January 6th, right?
Again, I guess the question was whether you have a reaction to the way Trump brought on January 6th and responded to January 6th. I mean, however you want to deal with it. Does anybody else want to touch that
honestly,
one?
Yeah, I'll touch that.
Yeah, sure.
I'll touch that. First off, January 6th, the police chief who I knew down at the Capitol Police, he requested 6 times before and during to have more support. The FBI knew that there might be right-wing people. They knew these things. And it really ultimately falls upon Nancy Pelosi. Now, according to the proper, I guess, Robert's Rules of Order, it's up to the Sergeant of Arms. The Sergeant of Arms denied the request. Pelosi knew about it. She denied 6 times. There was no insurrection. A bunch of bullshit. There was no insurrection. There was no graffiti. There was no massive destruction. There was no artwork destroyed. Most of the people acted like tourists. They did not kill a single person. The whole thing stinks. The one woman who got shot, we don't even know who shot her. Something stinks. The other thing is the sheer hypocrisy of the left and the Democrats when they allowed, months before that, a real insurrection where there was fires across from the White House. Even New York Times reported a fire extinguisher, a cop got beat to death. It was lies. It was false news. There was no insurrection. They had a Black Lives Matter reporter who now has been charged, who got, what did he get? $90,000. He was Black Lives Matter activist, posed as a reporter. And they came in and their films showing him egging on people. Most of the protesters were peaceful. Give me a break. Photographers were in place. They knew what happened. Give me a break on this. I can't believe what people want to call an insurrection. Not one gun was found or taken. Not one death came as a result of violence from a Trump person. There was tons of knowledge of this. Trump said in his speech, march peacefully down there. And to try and make everything against Trump. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter did $2 billion of damage. Not one word from the Democrats, except we'll bail you out of jail. $2 billion. And they have real insurrections taking over the Capitol, taking over parts of cities, destroying businesses. So this whole insurrection thing is a bunch of crap. And I don't care what anyone wants to say or make it out to be.
All right, so
I would like to Steve's
next-
comment. 1 second, then I would like to add to Steve's comment because I have a little bit of data here. Everybody loves data. A study from Democracy Fund Voter Study Group found that 22% Democrats and 21% Republicans said some amount of violence would be justified if the candidate they oppose wins the White House. So you can only imagine what would have happened if Trump won the elections.
All right, so I'm adding to my list Paul Wathan and Vincent Palathingal, and we're going back though early on to Fatima Argun with Daniela Bloom on deck.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that.
Hold on, no, we're going to Fatima now. We're working our way down the list. I'm just mentioning who else is on the list. We're going in order. Fatima, go ahead.
Okay. Wow. How much time do I have?
Not a lot.
Oh, well, I don't want to say not a lot because I want to ask all of my questions.
Well,
and I
you
want
can't.
real answers. I don't want glossed over policies. I want real answers with real stats, not hypotheticals about 22% of Democrats might have done this. They didn't do it. The fact is the Republicans did do it. Okay, so I'm going to go on with my other questions. What I keep hearing is sort of the undertone is family. And, you know, I'm asking whose family are we really talking about when we talk about they voted for him because of family? Is it the same family that would be cut off from, is that why they kept on trying to kill the Affordable Care Act? How is that family friendly when you can't afford to pay for health care for your children? You know, that to me doesn't seem very family friendly. If it's about abortion and controlling women's bodies, I get that. You know, that's what you considered family friendly. I guess we have a different definition of that. Going to his kids, they voted
can I finish, or are people talking?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, talking about his kids and, you know, how they're all well brought up. Really? Is that why they take coke and abuse animals? And you see them, you know, in pictures where, you know, they're proudly displaying animals that they've killed. There's numerous, don't look, there's tons of these pictures online. They're hard to miss. They're everywhere. And they're not doctored either. These are real pictures. You know, fear, and they don't respect their father. I'll tell you, they fear their father. They do not respect their father. Because Trump, the other thing was because Trump made it as a businessman, with only $1 million. No, that is completely, first of all, it's factually incorrect on its face. When Donald Trump was not even a teenager, he already had inherited well over, you know, 30-40 million dollars from his father. So you know, that inheritance he was already going to get. His father gave him a lot more money. If anyone has read Mary Trump's book, Mary Trump is, by the way, for those of you that don't know, is a part of his family, and so she saw a lot of this stuff firsthand. She knows what happened. So he was not a self-made millionaire. And in the process, there is a list a mile long of contractors that he cheated. And I see people getting up to leave because they don't like what I'm saying. I think you need to listen so you can know about.
And Fatima, can I support you in 1 second? Just, you got to stop in a moment. But I want to say, this is JIDS. You don't have to just ask questions. You can make statements. So go ahead. One more statement, Fatima.
You know, respect for the military. What military were you talking about? Is it the same military that was that he called suckers and losers? Is it the same military who has what about the Gold Star family that, you know, he disparaged? What about the Muslim woman who was the father of the Gold Star family, you know, who he disparaged by saying, well, maybe she can't say anything? I mean, you know, that's just completely ignorant. And any Muslim should have cringed when he said that. You know, it basically says that Muslim women just don't have any agency. And I think that is far from the truth. And
can we hold it at that? Because that's a lot for a non-panelist. The first thing you said, I'm going to take the first thing you said as a question.
Can I add one other thing? It's about Hillary, and
I
they
know, but
didn't
you've
vote
got
for Hillary because of Benghazi.
Okay.
Well, okay, 5
Okay.
people died in Benghazi, and Hillary testified for 11 hours. Okay, Trump killed millions of people through his recklessness in various ways, and he still stands behind a team of lawyers because he doesn't have the guts. He doesn't have the balls to testify.
Fatima, I'm going to start where you started and pose it as a question. And maybe Saba, if you can address it, or someone else, because you haven't had a chance yet. I think the first thing that Fatima said was, we've heard a lot about family values. How can this be the party of family values and the candidate of family values if they wanted to get rid of Obamacare? And I gather implicit in that, and replace it with nothing. So if one of the panelists wants to address that, and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about the family values. I mean, there was several policies enacted under the Trump administration that helped families. I remember they passed the family for federal employees. They passed the Family Leave Act, paid maternity leave, which was not unheard of before. There was several policies that were enacted. In terms of the buying health insurance, Obamacare has its flaws. It's not perfect. And I don't think the government should be mandating everybody to buy health insurance. It's a free enterprise, a capitalist country. You can get the best healthcare that you want. But I don't think anybody should be forced to buy it through the government. And that's what I think them.
Thank you, Saba. So Daniela Bloom and Gary Sampliner is on deck. Go ahead, Daniela.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually here in Los Angeles in the middle of a recall. If it's okay with you, I just want to say a few things as a former liberal who has passionately voted for Trump now twice. The reason being mainly is because coming to the Beverly Hills rallies and uniting with people of all different ages and religions, backgrounds, for why we love this country, why its freedoms are so important, what we know from our own parents and parents before of what communism and socialism is like. This is not what is portrayed in the media. Trump supporters are vilified as not regular people who are actually pretty level-headed, just like some of the panelists have said. And it continues to happen now with how they are trying to vilify the unvaccinated. It is really important. Trump deranged syndrome is real. I voted policy over personality. We had 4 years of quiet. We had no wars. Trump was nominated for 3 Nobel Prizes within 4 months of Biden taking office. We had a war in Israel for the new Palestinian aid that went directly to Iran in the form of rockets from Gaza, from Hamas through Gaza to Israel. When you have liberals crying about kids in cages, and then the border crisis is amplified times 1,000, exponential human crisis with women and children at the border, vulnerable to sex crimes and kidnapping, not to mention what's happening in Afghanistan. I think the media is a big problem in this. I think that the echo chambers continue to be amplified. And when people get triggered over Trump saying, grab him by the pussy and these stupid things that he says, but not judging him by action, whereas Biden, apparently, who says everything right, but in the meantime is screwing up our entire country and our entire world, gets away with everything. I just don't understand it. And what is it going to take for people to actually not get triggered on sound bites, but see what's happening on the ground and realize there's a greater agenda? This is beyond anything we've ever seen. It's happening in the schools with critical race theory. It's dividing us every chance it gets. And as a Jew who's been called more than once a racist, a Nazi, a domestic terrorist, it's because of me the COVID pandemic has not ended. This is exactly the mindset with how the Holocaust started. And I know that's not a popular opinion. It's a very, but but this is the beginning. This is the beginning. Right. I just had a call today, whether or not my family has been vaccinated, and we are in very scary times and people need to open their eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. And I hope you take in a Stanford game this year out there, and for my sake. Half of my heart is always in California and mostly in Stanford Stadium.
Right now it's about recalling Newsom, and if you can vote in California, vote.
Football season's about to start.
Yes.
All right, Gary Sampliner, you're next.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to you and for helping elicit the panelists' views, and for the panelists for finally getting them out. And I think we can understand ultimately what they had to say, and someday maybe people want to look again, and because I think the quality or lack thereof of each panelist's presentation did finally come across, and there was so much to comment on. Daniela, I just heard some very thoughtful comments that I'd love to take someday a couple hours, but we can't do that. I just wanted to focus on one issue and to put a couple of facts in front of you and see if those facts, if they mean anything to the panelists. And they start with, in December of 2015, Donald Trump announced that he wanted there to be a total and complete ban of all Muslims from coming to the United States until we could figure out what was going on. That remained his position throughout the campaign. It remained on his website through May of 2017. There was the first Muslim ban or travel ban, I'll just call it that, in January, that, as Giuliani said, it was just taking Trump's pronouncement and, as Giuliani said, making it legal, but essentially doing that for 7 countries, making it a complete ban. That was gradually massaged by DOJ to make it a little bit more legal. And Trump was complaining about it as being, not really what he wanted. He wanted a full travel ban. Ultimately, they won in the Supreme Court. The issue largely went away as a result. But what we see in Steve's summary of Trump's accomplishments, he listed keeping the terrorists out, didn't mention anything else about the travel ban, but mentioned as an accomplishment that we reduced our refugee flow by 85%. That is an accomplishment of the Trump administration. And what you should remember is that the White House took an adamant position that we wanted a 100% ban of all refugees. That was 100% denial, a zero quota was the Trump Stephen Miller position. The Pentagon had to insist on getting the 15%. Otherwise, there was 85,000. And then what we saw yesterday, and I think, or the last couple of days, that shows Trump's true colors when he tweets about the refugees being, Afghans on the flight out of Kabul. He says, no, I want to see Americans on that flight. Why are there Afghans? And of course, his amen chorus in Fox News is right on point with him, and he is going all the way. So I'd like to ask the panelists, does that bother you? Does that trouble you? Does it just trouble you a little bit, or does it trouble you a lot?
So let me speak to the
let me
Muslim ban.
respond. Oh, Saba, go ahead, Saba. But I would like to get a chance as well, because I'm an immigrant and I'm really immigrant. Saba was brought here when she was young, and I would like to hear her perspective. She's Muslim. I'm not.
Sure.
But I would like to speak up as well.
Okay, I'll just speak briefly about the. I'll just mention a little bit about the Muslim ban. As a Muslim, I was very appalled when he did say a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. I thought that was a very ignorant statement. But at the same time, we reached out to the Trump campaign and advised them on that. And I believe he did tone down quite a bit after that. There was quite a bit of backlash. There was not a Muslim ban per se, although the left tried to spin it as that. It was a travel ban from certain countries that were listed even under the Obama administration on certain watch lists. So just, there was completely non-Muslim countries out there. I believe there was Venezuela or Cuba or North Korea or some other countries on that list as well. So that had nothing to do with Muslims. And so it's not fair to call it a Muslim ban. And that's why it was also upheld at the Supreme Court, because it's a national security issue. You do need to watch who's coming in the country and who's not. We can't just, and to the comment about, yes, there is Afghan refugees coming here. I do agree somewhat about why aren't the Americans being evacuated first? Like, why are we the refugees? I mean, I would assume that Americans should take priority on American jets. Then just, we can't bring the whole nation of Afghanistan here. We can't bring millions of refugees. We have to be smart about it. But yes, I think the first priority of the Biden administration should be to get Americans out of the country and then focus on other refugees and others. So.
Thank you. Anna?
I 100% agree with Saba. I 100% agree with Saba. American citizens should be first priority, because if you lose American citizens now and bring refugees, who will ever trust you as a government? If you get in trouble, who will trust this government that they will get them out of trouble? That's one. With regards to closing the borders completely to Muslims, let me give you an example. And I like examples. Have you ever played Russian roulette?
Not recently.
Basically, you buy a box of Russian roulette. You buy a box of condoms. You take one out and you poke it and you put it back. Okay? And so for those who praise abortions, maybe it's not such a big issue. But for those who don't, you're in for a treat. What about buying a box of M&Ms, knowing that out of 100 candies there, one of them is poison? Would you buy the whole box? Would you eat, knowing that 99% of these candies are clear? They're good for you, they're just sugar. Would you eat such a box? So that's the reason behind closing the borders 100%, until you can identify who is that poisonous element. It just takes one. And 9/11 showed it very well. I was right there. I was across the street. I was working in the building across from the World Trade Center. And thank God we moved from the building in the World Trade Center just 3 months before it happened. So yes, I totally support Trump's policy. Like I said, I support all his policies. Close the borders completely. Identify who is that rotten immigrant that you don't want to let in, and then let the immigrants in. Make some order. Differentiate between holy and all, just like we say when Shabbat ends.
Thank you, Anna. Now, Manga, I see your hand up. I wanted to go to the next person. Do you want to say something real quick?
Yes, every time somebody asks that question, why he actually banned Muslim population from certain countries. I mean, I'm not talking about a Muslim population or during the COVID. Anything Trump does, I think it is bad. Even during COVID, when he stopped international travel, there was such a hue and cry from the Democrats that he is being a racist and not allowing immigrants to come into this country. When it comes to immigration and national security, I mean, there should be no compromise when it comes to national security. And that's how the policies have to be implemented. And absolutely, there is no win-win with Trump. Anything he says is bad. Anything he doesn't say is bad. And of all the people who actually, when the international travel was banned during COVID, who was the most upset people? It was Democrats. It was Nancy Pelosi. She went to Chinatown and had ice cream and displaying that everybody should go and have an ice cream. And this president is such a joke and hoax, and there is no pandemic. So I think it is time to let the bias go, to let your personal hate go. It's time to look beyond your personal interest. The country is absolutely not for you or for me, that you are there for the country. Let's get this into our heads. What is your responsibility as a citizen to keep the country safe? What is your duty in the times of pandemic or for national security? What is important? Don't let your personal bias or hate ruin this country. Step back.
All right. So I want to
Breathe.
move on. Thank you. I want to move on to the next person, which is Kate Bennett. We have a couple more later. Kay Elfan and David Frost have joined. But before Kate starts, there's one thing I want to say to correct some people about facts. Trump voters here on the panel and otherwise, some of you may not be watching CNN or reading the New York Times or the Washington Post or all of that these days. Just for the record, they are hammering Biden. So let me throw that out so that everybody understands that. They are hammering him. A lot of Democrats right now are. So I'm just saying that because I think that's a fact, not a value. And I want to go on to Kate Bennett. One of the things about Kate that if you don't know Kate, one of the great things about Kate is you never know what side she's going to be on until she starts talking. So let's all find out.
Okay, I thought Vincent was before me, so I wasn't completely compared, but I want to very quickly thank the panel. I don't want to spend a lot of my precious short time on that. I will say a few things. I personally liked some of the things that Trump did. I liked the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. I liked him signing prison reform. I'm willing to give him credit on the mock speed COVID vaccination. I loved the Abraham Accords. I have a lot of scientific issues with the climate hysteria that we have. So there were things that I did like about him. Am I still on? Oh yeah,
Yes.
I'm there.
Go ahead.
Okay, very quickly, I will tell you that he could have been Mother Teresa. And after what he did to provoke the events of January 6th, and I watched this building, and anybody with eyes to see, I believe is just being willfully blind if you do not recognize in that rally they had in Georgia that the passcode was January 6th. Anybody with eyes to see could tell that he was fomenting an insurrection in this country that I love very much. I did not realize how much I loved my country until I spent a lot of my youth overseas. It was sort of in my generation to be unpatriotic. After 9/11, a lot of things changed for me. I was invited to a conference in October of 2011 or 2001, 1 month after the attacks. And when the customs agent said, "Welcome home, ma'am," I started crying because I realized how much deeply I love this man. I am on board with you about a lot of your policy issues, but I can think of Mitt Romney and Jeff Flake and Gergen and Bill Kristol and George Will, and I just wrote down, and Colin Powell and the guy's first name from Louisiana, Kennedy. I will be a part of that group, but in my mind, Trump is a traitor. He is an insurrectionist. He is a treasonist. He tried to overthrow our government. I feel so passionately about this. He didn't support our troops. He called them suckers and losers. He was a complete opportunist. Despite what someone said, he's a brilliant politician. He may very well be the most brilliant politician in this country has ever seen, because somehow he managed to, in my opinion, take 40% of this country and absolutely, I'm sorry to use the term, brainwash them. I know that's offensive to some of you who have voted for him. I am totally sorry. I like you all. I respect you all. I appreciate your position, but I cannot abide by this. There is so much wrong in policy. I know people, I work for the NIH. I have international communities. Syria considers the drone attacks to be Obama's war. There were many, many mistakes that were made. Afghanistan has been a clusterfuck, pardon my language. And you're right, he has been rightfully hammered. I hope he has the decency to step down and not run for president again. I want to see him fill out his term. I think I've probably said everything I had to say.
Thank you. So we've got Mike Goss and Andrea Barron on deck. Mike, you're muted. Mike.
Wait, aren't we responding to Kate?
Well, I think right now, I want to make sure
We don't have time to listen to our opinions anymore. I got it.
I'm asking to hear less from the panelists right now because we got a lot of hands raised. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Dan. I just want to say hello to Sabah. And I was a former Republican some 15 years ago. But when I hear Republicans talk only against science, against climate change, and all that, I heard McCain and other guys talking about bombing and destroying other nations rather than rebuilding nations. That's when I walked out of the Republican Party. Republican Party ideals are very good. I'm still a Republican in my heart, but I don't like any of the Republicans out there because they're doing destruction of this nation and other countries. As an independent now, Dan, it amazes me how people see things irrationally on both sides. I wish both Sabah and Ranga and the other people start watching MSNBC as well as Fox. Both Sabah and I have been on Fox News. I watch both Fox, CNN, and thing. When you hear all of them, you get a gist of what is right rather than the rhetoric. They need to cut down the rhetoric and start talking the facts. And that is what my note is. And I appreciate holding this event, Dan.
Well, thank you, Mike. Andrea.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question for Sabah. Sabah, thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. You're being very honest and authentic. I first wanted to say that I don't know if you were aware that there were 2,243 drone strikes in the first year of the Trump presidency compared to 1878 in Obama's 8 years in presidency. So, you know, I'm not sure why you thought that Trump stopped the drone strike, because he actually launched more drone strikes than Obama did. And also what Trump did do is in Pakistan, before under Obama, there had to be military had to report the number of civilians who were killed by the drone strikes. And what Trump did is he said, no, they don't have to report anymore the civilian deaths caused by the drone strikes. So that was a big difference. So that was a comment, but then I have a question. And the question is, I wanna pick up on something that I think it was Fatima who said that. So when Trump was commenting to Khizr Khan, who is the father of the late Army Captain Humayun Khan, as Fatima said, what happened is Trump was saying, why didn't Khizr Khan's wife, why didn't Khizr Khan allow, quote unquote, allow his wife to say anything? Because she was a Muslim woman wearing hijab and she was quiet during the Democratic National Convention. And Trump was kind of making fun of Khizr Khan and making fun of Muslim women, saying that she wasn't allowed to speak. So Saba, did you think that Trump really supports Muslim women? And do you think that he disrespected the army captain, Humayun Khan, who was killed in Iraq? That's my specific question for Saba.
Okay, Saba?
So first of all, obviously he was trying to deflect the question and deflect the controversy that was raised after Khizr Khan was on the stage. That's the only reason behind why he made the comments he did about his wife. But other than that, you know, it's like I said, I have struggled within the Republican Party as a Muslim. So it's not easy, but at the same time, I feel that my values align with this party. So why would I go and support somebody where I, on a very core religious level and core Islamic level, I can't support the liberal Democrat policy. So why would I be there? So this is the conservatives Republican Party. It's not perfect. I'm not going to agree 100% on everything. And like I said, Trump was never the presidential career politician. Like Biden is, you know, he's been in politics for decades. So yes, he's not as polished, but at least when it came down to taking strong actions and for the country, I think Trump was much, much, much better than Biden and what we're seeing the mess in different areas of the U.S.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your answer.
Jim Ehrman, I saw you ask a question on the chat. Would you like to ask your question or make a statement now? Jim? Okay. Rational Marylander, would you like to be heard and identify yourself? All right. Paul Waffen. There you are.
Okay, there. What I'm hearing, at least from many of the panelists, is a statement in effect that while Trump was not perfect, he was the Republican nominee, and they subscribe to Republican policies because they are consistent with their own personal policies and beliefs and whatnot. And I can respect that. I can respect that a lot. However, what this panel is all about is the polarization of American politics. And so my question is, I think we would all agree that Trump, throughout his presidency and even afterwards, has done a great deal of name calling and disparaging. He has dismissed any news stories or news outlets that don't agree with him as fake news and not therefore worthy of listening to. And of course, he has told countless lies that at least people on the left keep pointing to and saying nothing he says is worth listening to. So the question is, hasn't he exacerbated the polarization that we're talking about here? And isn't the solution or part of the solution to turn away from Trump the person and toward more rational Republican policies?
Somebody want to handle that in the panel? I mean, Steve has already said, I think, that he hopes Trump does not become president again. Maybe we can hear from another panelist on that point.
I can speak about that. If you're not tired of me yet.
Sorry, say that again?
I can speak about that if you're not tired of me yet.
Okay.
And I would love to address, there was a comment about science, and I would love to address that. I'm a scientist. So I just can't let it slide by without addressing it. So regarding supporting Trump versus somebody else from Republican Party, yeah, I would support either one of them. I believe Trump is more outspoken than others. He's a little bit more ruthless, but that jives with me because I'm also very ruthless. Yeah, he says things that nobody wants to hear, and so do I. But he does things that I agree with. And so, yeah, I support him. And if somebody else becomes nominated, I will gladly support them. Now, with regards to science, somebody mentioned a long statement about science and how can you not believe in science. I want to bring you two little examples. First, when I came to this country some 27 years ago, it was on this wave of sugar-free diet. So all sugar was replaced with aspartame. And everything, if you wanted to lose weight, everything was loaded with aspartame. Science said it was much better for you than sugar. Lo and behold, 15 years later, we realized that aspartame is actually poison. That's poisonous to rats, that's poisonous to people, and causes cancer. So here's your science. Let me give you another example. Some of you know, 2 years ago, I had no place to live for 2 years. I was literally bouncing from basement to basement with my family. Why? Because asbestos was exposed in my house. Asbestos, which 50 years ago, when my house was built, was proclaimed by science the most robust, durable material there is, only to find out some 30 years later that it's cancerous. So yes, I believe in science. I'm a scientist, but science is evolving. The key word, it is evolving. What science believes in today does not necessarily mean that it's absolute truth and will remain truth forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we next have Vincent Halathingle. And we've got Kay, Elfont, David Frost, and Iman Adin on deck. Go ahead, Vincent.
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, I heard many people talk about the so-called insurrection on January 6th. And being a person who was there on January 6th, I was called an insurrectionist, white supremacist, and all of that stuff. I am sitting here like with a real frustration when people call these 1 million people who came there with no weapons whatsoever, with all the patriotic fervor, the songs, and I saw people kneeling on the ground and praying, raising their hand and praying. And you call all these people insurrection, and you had a sham investigation in the Congress. We just saw it. It's ongoing. Whenever she wants, she will start an investigation. I just want the Democrats here who are very passionately going after President Trump to listen to these facts just for a minute. He said very clearly at his speech from the White House on January 6th, go march peacefully and patriotically. He said that very clearly. You can watch the recording. And I wanted the investigation to go in a direction to find real answers of what happened, how the protesters were able to walk into the building in such a protected building. When we normally go, it's very hard to get in there. This was like we were all, when I walk in there into the lawn of the Capitol, there was no barriers, there was nothing, people were just walking in. And why the National Guard that is trained to deal with even terrorist attacks, what they were doing when these people were doing this? Who tied their hands behind their back? And where was the Capitol Police? Where was the National Guard that Trump offered that Pelosi did not take? And without having no weapons, how can people be called insurrectionists? And if these 1 million people who assembled in Washington, D.C. on that day were insurrectionists, that building will not be there. Do you understand that?
Fucking moron.
It's like maybe 200 of the people who got violent, who created the mayhem there. They cannot make a person like me, an immigrant who came to this country 29 years ago, who voted for Obama twice, voted for Obama. an insurrectionist and a white supremacist. This is just a bogus claim. You can keep on talking about it. You can keep on making a big deal about it. Insurrection, insurrection. It was not an insurrection. It was a protest march. And there was no killing. So I have a lot of things to talk about Trump, but I'm not a panelist.
Okay.
I want people to understand this, that there was no insurrection. You can keep on talking about it a million times. It is not an insurrection.
All right. Thank you very much for your perspective, Vincent. Kay, Elfant, okay, you're next.
Yes. First of all, it's a pleasure to see Mike Gauss's smiles tonight. I have a couple of questions for Steve Tannenbaum. First, how do you explain, let me just say them all in a row. How do you explain these tourists with metal pipes striking people with flagpoles, all the movie footage, camera footage of all the attacks, the man screaming, caught in the doorway, and all the permanent injuries? 60, 70, 80 people were injured, of the police, I think, were injured that day, some of them permanent, and the suicides after. Also, how do you explain the fact that the president sat amidst the chaos of who should be calling in more help, which certainly got messed up? Nobody really took charge. How do you explain the president sitting and watching TV for hours with Congress people begging to talk to him, not taking phone calls, and he finally took a call after his daughter came into the room and said, "You must take these calls"? I want to know how you explain that.
And Steve, before you start, I think some folks have not been muted. Please try to mute yourself when you're not speaking.
First off, I'd like to say, I'll give a response that's a Democrat response to the Black Lives Matter $2+ billion in damages, with no repercussions that we paid for, with no guns that were taken. They said it's a social justice movement. Okay, so to speak in your terms, it was a social justice movement. There was not one gun taken. What kind of insurrection doesn't have a gun? There are films on YouTube showing someone in the Capitol was handing out baseball bats from the window. The Black Lives Matter reporter who was posing as a reporter is on film instigating. He's the only one. The other Trump supporters were saying, "No, what are you doing? Don't break the windows." It's on film.
Steve, in terms of time, we're running out of time. If you can concentrate on January 6th, the Black Lives Matter is a different issue, related, I guess. Yeah.
So January 6th, there are films showing Trump supporters ganging up on the people beating the windows. The Black Lives Matter reporter who was posing as a reporter, and he got busted. He got $90,000. He's on film instigating, trying to get people to smash stuff when most of the people were not. Trump, should he have responded? Possibly. It's not up to him. It's up to Pelosi, who is in charge of the security. The ultimate hands of security fall upon the Speaker of the House 6 times prior, during, as stated and testified by the former chief of the Capitol Police, was denied calls for help. It was a horrible thing, but it was nowhere near an insurrection. Yes, There were baseball bats. Yes, there were people hurt. But as Joe Biden and the Democrats say, it's okay. It's a social justice movement.
All right, I don't see David Frost. Imad Adin, you're muted, please, Imad.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists for being willing to address an audience that overwhelmingly doesn't agree with them. And I want to remind everyone that we are not here to debate principles.
Hold on,
or
Imad,
policy.
Imad. Somebody's got to mute themselves. I'm hearing a lot of stuff in the background. Please, thank you. Go ahead.
I was saying we're not here to debate policies or principles, but to discuss polarization. And as I think, Dan, you said at one point in promoting these sessions that not everyone who voted for Trump is stupid, demonic, or insane. And I would like to especially say that I think that Saba has certainly convinced me that she respects the facts, that she's well-intentioned, and that she's realistic in the sense that she is aware and doesn't delude herself about ways in which Donald Trump does not necessarily reflect or well advocate for the principles she embraces. She's convinced me that she is a conservative who felt unwelcome in the Democratic Party and feels relatively welcome in the Republican Party. And so in that respect, Dan, I think you've achieved your goal. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well, it's now 8:59. Just like we like people who show up on time, we like to end on time. But given that this is a three-part series, I think the last word should be with the panelists. I want to say thank you all who are still here. We hope that this has, increased your willingness to reach out to people, to befriend people on the other side. The whole reason for an organization like JIDS is so that people can become part of a community with the quote other. If we can do it across religion and we can't do it across political lines, it must mean that we have no religion. It must mean we're not passionate about our religion. And I, for one, think that would be very sad. So we need to be able to do it both across religious lines and across political lines. So I encourage you to do that. And so let's go one at a time. We'll go in the same order real quick. If you have any last words, and we'll start with you, Steve. You're muted.
First off, I'd like to thank you, Dan, for the opportunity and for what you do is really amazing. Second off, all the participants for their maturity, for their education, for their wisdom. It's a pleasure talking to people with different views who will actually listen to each other. And I really appreciate that. I just want to end on a couple things that we have to look back where in my world, the best thing you can do for a person is give them a job. It gives them self-worth. They feed their family. They don't have time to get into trouble. And under President Trump, we had the best job market we've seen in all our lives, in our whole lives. We had more opportunities. There were more Blacks owning homes, more Hispanic working. People were making money. Prices of gas were low. We could afford things. Manufacturing was coming back. And I think the main thing is to get people working, get them off dependence from the government. And I think, again, that as mature people who listen, I think part of our mission is to go out and to promote dialogue, to promote reconciliation, to promote the wonderful way how like you run these meetings and how the participants and panelists respect each other and listen to each other. I think if we can take that out into our own lives and homes and communities, then we could make this a better world.
Thank you, Steve. Anna Lipkin.
Unmute. I'm going to be very short. I've spoken enough and more. I just wanted to say that what I began with, I stand by the same thing. And somebody mentioned here, facts, facts, please bring facts. Remember, how many fingers do you see? And how many fingers are there altogether? The same thing could appear as two different things, and that's fact. You see 4 fingers, and I see 5. So if you would like to understand the other side, try, well, you can put yourself in their shoes, but try to see the world from their position. And maybe it will make it clear for you and easier for you to understand where they're coming from.
Thank you. Manga. You're muted.
Yeah. All I want to say before I conclude is thanks for everybody for participating. We really welcomed your opinions and your viewpoints, why you did not vote for Trump. And I do respect, and I think everybody has a right to make a decision, a well-informed decision to cast their vote, because it's a privilege in this country to earn your voting privileges. And regardless of who you vote for, we need to learn to be tolerant towards others' choices. I think that's what is missing in the last few years. We have been called parade of horribles, uh, deplorables, basket of deplorables, and all other names. I mean, just because you belong to a certain political party or you voted for a candidate does not mean anything. That does not give us a right to judge other people. Let us learn to respect. That's what the Constitution is all about. That's what this whole voting process is about. That's the reason why we are given the choice of 2 or more parties to vote for our candidate. So it's okay to be on the other side, but then let us be respectful. Let us not lose the rationality. Let us give up on personal hate and bias. Let's just try to accept and respect each other's views going forward. I think that's more healthy and more republic-like, and that's more America-like, what we all have seen and loved. So that's the last word I have.
I just have to say before we go to the last panelist that Manga, if you ever start a Hindu-Muslim dialogue society, I promise to join as an ally.
Thank you so much. I think we should start that dialogue.
Saba, you will have the last words once you unmute yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan, and for arranging this panel. I learned a lot from my other co-panelists and everybody, the questions, and we have a lot of work to do. There is a lot of polarization in America, and I hope that we can all come together, put our differences aside. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of, bringing America together. This country is so divided right now, and we're really suffering. Our foreign policies are suffering, our domestic policies are suffering, and I just hope that we can, put our differences aside and work together for the better of this world. And I hope that, going forward, especially in the next few years, I will become more active with JIDs and with I used to do a lot more interfaith work before, but I hope I can get back into that. I really enjoyed it. I think it's spiritual work. We're about to break our fast in a few minutes. Today is 10 Muharram, which is the Islamic New Year. And it's a very historical day because we believe this was the day that Moses split the sea and all the people got saved from Pharaoh, and the Prophet Noah parked his boat, finally, his ark. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his grandson was martyred today. So there's a lot of division between the Shia and Sunni Muslims. So this is a very sacred day. And I was very humbled to to make this panel a part of my this day. I think it's very spiritual work that you guys are doing and bringing people together and talking about things that you know, are not very comfortable all the time, but having these difficult discussions are important, and I hope that we can all learn from them. And so peace to you all, and thank you so much again for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Once we figure out what we want to do about being inside a dwelling or being in a sukkah or just doing virtual things, JIDS will come back again soon with more programming. You all take care.
Bye, everybody.